President Xi Jinping has called for China to establish and strengthen its think tanks, making the development of think tanks with Chinese characteristics a national strategic. He stated bluntly that Chinese think tanks have a hard time changing alongside China's rapid development, and that China lacks think tanks with great influence and international reputation. I cannot recall another senior leader of any country giving such a clarion call to construct think tanks. What's the reason? What do China's think tanks do now? What should they do? What's their role in China's reform and development? Reporting to the government, can they critique the government? How can they be creative, innovative? What does it mean anyway that China's think tanks have Chinese characteristics? How do they differ from Western think tanks? Let's speak with some of China's leading think tanks to get closer to China.
Today's China is attaching increasing significance to think tanks. A global report on think tanks released in January 2016 showed that China had the second largest number of think tanks in the world, the first being the United States. China's Belt and Road Initiative alone has brought about a new think tank boom, with more than 100 think tanks focusing on researching the initiative. And in 2015, China's number of top 150 global think tanks increased from 7 to 9. President Xi Jinping has repeatedly emphasized the importance of think tanks, and the Chinese government has established favorable policies for think tank growth and development.
Why President Xi has made a special effort, the first I recall for a national leader to call for the specific development of think tanks. What's the motivation?
Xi is very forward-looking. He is aware of the challenge featuring complex domestic and international landscapes. He sees the value of learning from America's experiences with its many years of think tank development. Companies like the Brookings Institute, Rand Corporation, and others have all played important roles in major policy decision-making in the U.S. If we want science-based decisions that uphold democracy, we must pool wisdom of the general public. China is never short of talented people. Our premier recognizes that many of the talented are hidden among the public. We should gather them together for better ideas. On the whole, we are still at the end of the queue in the international list and are painfully struggling to meet the demands.
Actually, you may be aware, at this moment, Chinese leadership is calling for the bigger role of Chinese think tanks. And one major requirement is to have more new ideas, forward-looking ideas that are really 10 years ahead, 20 years ahead. And actually this is what we call innovative thinking, and China needs that. And what's good is we have a system which encourages forward-looking planning in its broad sense, which means really how China will be like 20 years from now. And now we're actually doing Shanghai 50 years from now. So this kind of discussion among the think tanks, with the think tanks, really inspire new ideas.
And this is very important, and think tanks have played a major role, particularly in the U.S. In the U.S., the way it works is that think tanks in general have an orientation, and generally it's a political orientation. We say it's either a conservative or liberal. Some are centrist, some are more economic, some are more political. So how do you see the think tank industry, as we say, developing in China?
Of course, China has its own think tanks since many decades ago. Yet it's also true that the Chinese think tanks has its own weaknesses. For one thing, it is most of them are what we call comprehensive think tanks, rather than think tanks with specialized expertise on particular issue. You look at the new initiative, so-called One Belt, One Road, or the Belt and Road Initiative. it requires all kinds of inputs, intellectual inputs, the country studies, area studies, area studies, economic studies, social studies. All of a sudden we feel, actually we don't have enough think tanks with particular expertise. So at this particular moment, the Chinese central government encourages, the growth of new think tanks and invest in new think tanks. But there are good ones, otherwise you look back over the past 3 decades, so many initiatives from China. Even over the past 3 or 4 years, this AIIB, this BRICS Bank, this Silk Road Foundation, all these are good new initiatives which are raised, put forward, and then implemented. Compared with the American think tanks, of course, the United States has a much longer history in terms of building its think tanks. But the problem with the United States is you have a two-party system. Usually, particular think tanks are, as you said, produce ideas for that particular party or line of thinkers. So you have, I would say, 50% useful at a time, another 50% useless. In the Chinese case, if you have great ideas, more or less, in the interest of overall interest of China, and then the central government reacts very quickly. That's a bright idea, and please come to Beijing. Let's discuss it.
How can we begin to understand the totality of the structure of the think tank industry in China today, and how is it developing further?
中国目前的智库建设格局呢，我们通常称之为智库林立。
The pattern for think tanks in China can be described as thriving in numbers. That is, China is witnessing an upsurge of comprehensive development of think tanks. We can do a simple categorization. The first way is to categorize by level. There are think tanks at the national level, regional level, and those established by various organizations. Think tanks at the national level are directly funded and managed by the central government. Chinese Academy of Social Sciences is just one of the kind. In addition to national level ones, there are also those funded and managed by governments at different levels, say provinces, municipalities, autonomous regions, and the prefecture level cities. They all have their own think tanks working for them.
比如我们的省、市、自治区，以至于下边的地和市，其实也都相应的自己的智库。
What's a think tank with Chinese characteristics?
中国特色的新型智库首先强调一条，要站在代表全体人民。
New type think tanks with Chinese characteristics must be those that put people's interests first. They offer their research achievements to promote well-being of the whole society. I think this is where we differ from our Western counterparts. In a word, independence for think tanks in China refers to independence of their group interests.
第二呢？ 我们强调，它必须立足于中国的国情，因为研究。
Second, everything must be carried out based on China's national conditions. The purpose of doing research is to turn them into applications. If we want our think tank products to positively influence China's socio-economic development, we must take consideration of China's national conditions. That is also why field investigation especially matters in our research.
特别强调的是，要实地的调研。
How does it work in China? Because you're funded by the government, you report to the government. Is there a tendency to give the government what it wants to hear than what it should hear?
不同的智库类型啊，在中国呢，肩负着不同的使命。我只讲像我们这个。
Different types of think tanks show their different missions in China. For think tanks like our academy, we to a certain extent serve as guards. Before major decisions of the government are rolled out, we can openly and extensively discuss problems and raise our own ideas. But afterwards, we'll just focus on implementation to support the government decision. For example, regarding the official planning and issuing of the 13th five-year plan, we all air out opinions on the major decisions and how they can be best implemented. That is why I say the mission and positioning of our think tanks dictate how we put forth our opinions and suggestions. Once the official announcement is made by the government, we must consider influence or consequences of our sharing. However, if we really disagree, we can make good internal channels which will directly pass our ideas through. Such a system design is a result of the historical positioning of our think tanks.
这个历史定位上，它所应当发挥的这种作用上，一个可行的一个制度设计。
What has been the role of think tanks in the development of China's 13th five-year plan? In specific, your institute, the China Center for International Economic Exchanges, what role do you play? How do you participate in this grand national strategy?
China Center for International Exchange was established in March 2009, just at the peak of the international financial crisis, when domestic and international economic scenarios took on a very complicated pattern. When we were about to make major decisions in the past, we didn't have support from think tanks and might easily make mistakes or fail to have enough science-based evidence to strengthen validity of our decision-making. Therefore, we learn from the Americans in establishing such think tank institutions. As for our center, we already have a history of 7 years. Our chairman, as a former vice premier of the State Council, is very experienced. In the meantime, we boast a batch of experienced senior staff who are retired from their former senior positions of public management departments in the government. Still more, we recruit talented people from different walks of life in the society to set up typical social think tank. One feature of our think tank is being social. We never take 1 penny out of the government physical budget. We do not feed on government subsidies. Rather, we make money on our own. We also learn from the experiences of the U.S. think tanks by setting up a non-profit fund with the initial investment from companies in the society. Every year, there will be interest income or return on equity that can support our research to deliver social welfare. The selection of topics in our research is centered around major decision-makings of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council for mid and long term. Especially, there are some topics concerning the 13th five-year plan where we cooperate with the National Development and Reform Commission. We offer our support as some major decisions and suggestions of ours become adopted. For example, we've made the proposal that China initiate the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. President Xi has put it into practice. In this way, we not only help improve the traditional global governance system with a favorable add-up, but also satisfy the demand for developing China's new type, particularly meet the internal demand of the Belt and Road initiatives as President Xi has proposed, so as to realize full connectivity of the 3 continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe, and integrate the economy. Now the AIIB still adopts an open attitude and welcomes countries like America and Japan to join in. As a matter of fact, presented in front of us is not only common challenges, but more importantly, common interests. In this regard, I think think tanks should have further in-depth cooperation with each other. America is more experienced in developing think tanks, while we just get started and are still weak in infrastructure. So we need to learn from America and deliberate on reforming our think tanks' governance mechanisms as well as research capacities in the future.
What are the particular problems that you are facing in China today in developing think tanks?
第一，就研究人员而言，我们相当多的研究人员都是从过去做一般的学术研究，正在向智库研究转型。
First, many researchers used to work in academia. They're turning from general academic research to think tank research. They cannot apply their academic interests or even strengths to the new job during the transformation. Second, for a very long time, the researchers were not merely think tank academics. During general academic research, some might tend to do practical research and do not fully understand how a think tank works or how its system is structured. We ourselves are learning through trials. At the start, we regarded it as an adjustment of research direction. Third, our think tanks differ from general types of international think tanks. So in developing new types of think tanks with Chinese characteristics, we do not have suitable examples to follow. Why do we call it new types of think tanks with Chinese characteristics? Because establishing think tanks must follow the path that goes with the Chinese institutional system. We are carrying out a long and hard search. These are the challenges we have come across so far. In fact, the biggest and most fundamental challenge is today's changing world. The changes have gone beyond the boundaries of subject setting. Any problem is highly complicated and comprehensive.
在很大程度上突破了这个学科设置的这种界限。任何一个问题，它都是高度复杂的、高度综合的。
You run one of the most important think tanks. Describe for me the importance of think tanks in China, including your own, and the contributions you can make in helping China move forward into the future.
In the past, there are a lot of traditional think tanks. Traditional think tank is one part of the bureaucracy of the system. So sometimes some of them, I mean, they are all my colleagues, I don't want to criticize them, but some of them consider themselves as maybe official. They dare not criticize the government. Even they criticize the government, they're not very accurate. So nowadays, we need the new model think tank that on the one hand, we are very independent.
Because in the past, a lot of think tanks were part of ministries or part of administrative organs that did research to support those organs. And so they couldn't say that my ministry should with another ministry to be efficient because then they'd be out of business.
Yeah. So I think the first is the new model think tank or new think tank. The first thing is that they should be independent. They responsible for the country, but not for the one or ministry or something like that. The second is they have produced more and more very useful production of wisdom or thinking production. The third is they should much more internationalizations. So as a new think tanks, we do like that. We are very independent, and we have a lot of connections with other countries' think tank, and also we focus on one of our, as I mentioned, one of our huge G20, and the economic belt of Silk Road. So that's our very international issues. So we have to push the international cooperations with other countries. So, the traditional think tank, when they thinking about the international issues, they will say, oh, this is very sensitive. But for us, we opened to a lot of other country think tank. So we call it a new model.
How can you, especially in the context of creating new think tanks, which Xi Jinping has called for, which I think is terrific for China, what are some of the things that you can do, and you're very familiar with it, you run a think tank as well as knowing what's happening in China, how can you encourage the kind of thinking that China needs? What are some of the steps you can take?
In the first place, it's already part of what's really happening. You have certain scholars, certain think tanks hold a particular political line of thinking, and with their own, expertise. So there's already a market of ideas that already exists in China. Now the other thing is, very often the Chinese government encourages different think tanks to produce Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. And even for the coming 13th five-year plan, and for One Belt, One Road initiative, they encourage different ideas to compete with each other. And then eventually the central government will make a selection, well, try to integrate whatever is good from different proposals. So this is happening. This process has been already established.
And how can you encourage young scholars to be creative and to try ideas that may not be currently accepted and not worry about what their boss may think or their future, and to be creative?
Actually, China today is perhaps arguably the most competitive universe, you may say. And you may have a bright idea and you want to create new enterprise, you can go ahead, you know, you can get money, yeah. And so at least I do not deny there are, you know, conservative forces, elements of traditional culture which are against innovation. But on the other hand, the mainstream is it's more about innovation, more about new ideas, new initiatives. Yeah. That's to do with China being a large country, different regions like different country, you know, and then they adopt different methods and approaches.
Over the past 3 decades, China's been attaching increasing significance to international exchanges. Today, China's think tanks are actively engaging with equivalent institutions around the world, exchanging ideas in diverse areas such as economics and governance, and seeking best practices for think tank management and development. In June 2015, international thought leaders shared their views at the 4th Global Think Tank Summit in Beijing. China's think tanks have problems, of course, such as shortages in non-governmental sources of funding. Xinhua reported in 2013 that 95% of the think tanks in China were funded by the government. Compared to their Western counterparts, Chinese think tanks lack global influence. Deeper and more frequent international exchanges are encouraged.
A member, we are here at Brookings, of one of the world's leading think tanks. President Xi came to you for advice on how to improve the Chinese think tank industry. What's the kind of advice you would give?
I would say first establish multiple sources of funding for them. When think tanks are funded by one organization, whether it's government or political or whatever, there is a natural tendency to tell them what they want to hear or to restrict the array of sources they go to and the kinds of information they package. Secondly, I would let them generate their own agendas. Think tanks want to be relevant, so they let them generate their own research programs and that kind of thing, and they will gravitate to the things that they know the leadership is most concerned about because they want to have impact. Right? So I think thirdly, I would permit not only cooperative projects with foreigners and with other think tanks, but actually, you know, fellows in residence from abroad and that kind of thing. We're at Brookings, we have resident scholars from around the world in our various programs. They contribute tremendously to making us better thinkers and more knowledgeable individuals. I mean, it's as simple as that. So, and Chinese think tanks tend to have conferences and symposia and, you know, that kind of thing. But if you want to have an American scholar in residence at the think tank, I'm aware of, offhand, I can't think of a case where that has been possible. Or where it's possible, say at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, for example, which is somewhere not quite an American think tank organization, but something like it. Still, you don't. I mean, there's a lot that you are not allowed to do, and you know. So the advantage of think tanks is that they hopefully will have people who are very concerned with government policy, right? They really want the society to do well. But they allow relatively free thinking about how to get from here to there and to get best practices and the capacity to talk to people both inside and outside of government and, you know, corporate and civil society organizations and so forth. And you get that by giving them the confidence that they can pursue what they think is important, that they do not rely on their funding solely on the favor, on whether they're in favor in some part of the government, and that they can benefit from international contacts and contacts elsewhere in China, including people in residence. They certainly want to send some of their people to be residents in other think tanks. So I think it's that kind of openness that that really gives you full benefit. You can get a lot of organizations, and China has a lot, that have very smart people who find out a lot, who are real experts in their field, but who are working on a specified agenda and basically know what they, on balance, the kind of parameters of what they need to put forward to be effective and to be acceptable. And I hope President Xi is going for something broader than that, because that's the real value of think tanks, is thinking out of the box, and in order to govern the place more effectively, in order to get better outcomes at every level of the system.
一方面我们要走出去，另一方面也要引进来，要加大跟国际
On the one hand, we need to go out. On the other, we need to bring in. Communications with Western counterparts is highly critical. We improve our own capabilities through exchange of ideas and experiences. However, at the same time, we must also attach great importance to our institutional reforms. Many think tanks, ours included, are detached from government organizations. Many researchers haven't got adapted to the change with enough flexibilities yet, so we need reform for improvement and establish a world-class think tank suited to China's national conditions and modeled on international best practices. This is the goal we strive for.
国际水准的智库机构这是我们奋斗的目标。
President Xi stated that intellectual resources play a crucial role in governing a country. The more arduous the reform, he said, the more intellectual support is needed. Moreover, China must strengthen its soft power in the world. These are the two big reasons why President Xi has made building China's think tanks and establishing new kinds of think tanks a national strategic priority. Domestically, China has become exceedingly complex, and reforms have entered deep waters. China's economy and society have numerous challenges, many of which compete with each other for priority. It is simply impossible for government to figure out optimum policies without sophisticated research and analysis of fundamental theories and practical strategies. Internationally, China seeks greater participation in the global marketplace of ideas. It is true that Chinese think tanks are not independent of the Chinese government, yet they can and do critique government policies in order to improve them. For Chinese think tanks to fulfill their mission, creativity and innovation must be stimulated, constructive criticism encouraged, and failure respected. We follow China's think tanks to keep closer to China.